So this is part 2 of how to sew a French seam. I posted part 1 on day 13 of my series Learn to Sew September, and that is the full tutorial of how to physically sew a French seam. On that video I got asked lots of questions just about French seam, so I'm going to answer all of them here. So the first question I got asked was about what fabric we would use a French seam on. So a French seam is for a lightweight fabric, it's not for a heavyweight fabric. It's for a very light fabric. In the demo video I used a cotton, and that was a mid-weight cotton. I think that's as heavy as I would go, but it's ideal for like chiffons, silks, viscose, cotton you can use, but again you don't want to go too heavy just because it gets very bulky. So it's for a lightweight fabric if you're making dresses, blouses, anything lightweight and flowy basically. And for seam allowance, I didn't use seam allowances numbers in that video because it was just showing how you can adapt your sewing pattern seam allowance. Basically it's half the seam allowance that you've got on your sewing patterns. So if your sewing pattern is 2 centimeters, you would sew with a 1 centimeter, cut it down, and then sew with another 1 centimeter to equal your normal 2 centimeter seam allowance. You need to adapt it to within your normal seam allowance, otherwise you'll be going into the garment size and adapting the size, which you don't want. So that's how you do it. You half the seam allowance of your sewing pattern. Was a comment saying about 5 centimeter seam allowance. I didn't mention a 5 centimeter seam allowance in that video, and that is quite a big centimeter seam allowance. You don't want to be using a 5 centimeter seam allowance for a French seam. You can do a French seam on any, you know, you can go very, very small with a French seam, you know, very, very delicate work if that's what you want, a smaller centimeter, but using a 1.5 centimeter total is absolutely fine for a French seam and gives a very, very nice look. If you're using a very sheer see-through fabric such as a chiffon or lightweight, you might want that seam allowance to be smaller just so you don't see it. I did a French seam on my Killing Eve dress when I used tulle around the arms, and I used about a 1 centimeter seam allowance total just so it wasn't too bulky. So hopefully that answers all the questions about French seams. If you've got any more questions about the French seams, put them in the comments and I will hopefully do another video on it. But I'm glad you enjoyed the French seam, and if you missed it, yeah, it's a really lovely seam basically to learn if you're learning to sew and you like doing lightweight fabrics. Anyway, my name is Holly Dennett. I'm a sewing content creator, pattern designer, now a fabric designer as well. I have a degree in fashion design, and this is what I do. I basically teach sewing. So if you want to follow along and learn more tips about sewing, the whole of September I've posted a video